Slade Green is located on the fringes of the English capital, hidden within the sprawl of the housing estates which follow the Thames estuary. It is a rural blip in the middle of everything, a stone's throw from the centre of London, overlooking endless rich green countryside. It was here in the 1980s, down a narrow hedgerow-lined lane, that Anne and Paul Andrews purchased their dream home. One of 4 old agricultural cottages, surrounded on all sides by fields. Sweetbriar Cottage, so their home was named, was unimaginably idyllic. And yet, within just a few months after moving in, it became the site of a series of events which left the family traumatized. Unsettling thumps and bangs would be heard around the house with no known origin. Electrical appliances, lights and television sets, whether plugged in or not, would turn on by themselves. Farm animals would die under mysterious circumstances, and, most terrifyingly, watchers, silent figures, would appear and wait so as to observe, and if their accounts are to be believed, abduct the Andrews family. Before we delve deeper into this case, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Established Titles for kindly sponsoring this video. After all, not all of the British countryside is marred by sinister paranormal happenings. It is instead rather charming, exceptionally beautiful, and with Established Titles' help, can even enable you to call yourself Lord or Lady. Established Titles is a unique project which allows you to purchase at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in rural Scotland. By making use of historic custom, whereby landowners are referred to as lairds or lords and ladies, this plot of land means you can forevermore style yourself as Lord or Lady. Formalised by a wonderful proclamatory certificate, this dedication features a unique plot number with which you can find the exact location of your land. And all of this means you could officially change your name to Lord or Lady, using it on credit cards, plane tickets, dinner reservations, or, like me, in YouTube videos. Above all, however, Established Titles enables you to not merely obtain, but also preserve the magnificence of the natural world. As, in addition to acting as custodian of your land in Scotland, Established Titles plants a tree with every order, with them working with charities including Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. A novel way to aggrandize yourself, all while helping to preserve picturesque woodlands, Established Titles lordships and ladyships packs also make wonderful gifts, especially at the last minute for Father's Day. They even have couples packs with up to 10 square feet of land being assigned to both title holders. At the moment, Established Titles are running an appropriately noble sale for Father's Day. Plus, if you use the code Paranormal Scholar, you will benefit from an additional 10% off. Simply visit establishedtitles.com/Paranormal Scholar or click the link in the description to take a look and help to support my channel and conservation efforts around the world. Thank you. In addition to moving to Sweetbriar Cottage, a new arrival in the family seems to have acted as a trigger for strangeness. In 1983, only a couple of months after moving in, Anne went into labour with her second child, a large lusty boy with a mop of jet black hair called Jason. Just like with her eldest son Daniel, Anne was in love and dedicated herself fully to her new infant. And so it should come as no surprise that she was horrified when, a month or 2 after Jason was born, she discovered him lying on the floor under his cot. Mysteriously, he had somehow moved from where she had left him, sleeping in the cot for an afternoon nap. On another occasion, she found him moved again, this time underneath a chair in the same room. This happened twice. The most horrific instance, however, was when Anne could not find her little son. Screaming for help, she heard him cry in response. He was behind the door, on the floor, pressed against the wall. At first, Anne suspected Daniel, thinking that he had moved his brother in an act of secret jealousy over there being a new baby in the house. And yet, when Jason was found moved again and again, even when Daniel was out of the house and staying with his grandmother, Anne knew that he could not have been responsible. Someone or something was moving her baby. This sinister strangeness continued for 2 months before stopping suddenly. And so, with life and 2 small children to keep her busy, Anne's concerns were forgotten, until yet more oddities occurred. According to Anne Andrews in her book Abducted, the true story of an alien abduction in rural England, a key date in her family's experiences was the 2nd of July 1987. It was Jason's 4th birthday, and so a day of celebration. It would, however, be remembered for other reasons. It was around 10 o'clock on a Friday evening at the cottage, and Jason, exhausted from a day of being the birthday boy, was asleep on the sofa when a loud banging at the door, a sound similar to a heavy boot being thrust against the door with tremendous force, was heard. Naturally, the head of the house, Paul Andrews, rushed to confront whoever was outside. Upon opening the door, he saw that there was no one there. The lane outside was clear. It was then, according to Anne's testimony, that a great crack of thunder, louder than she had ever heard before, sounded above the house. This was supposedly followed by distant rumblings, which rapidly built until all that could be heard was noise. In the midst of this, a flash of lightning is said to have illuminated the house, causing Jason to bolt upright from where he had been sleeping on the sofa. Eyes open and staring, it was as though he was unaware of the rest of the room. He then proceeded to talk, spewing out an incredible stream of numbers, fantastic numbers, huge numbers, strange algebraic configurations, mathematical terms like pi and binary codes. Jason was 4 years old, and his family stood aghast. Believing him to be suffering a medical episode, his distraught father tried to call the emergency services, but was unable to, as the phone was not working. All of a sudden, the banging and cracking ceased, as did Jason's talking. Anne reports that her son then stood, slipping from the sofa and moving towards the front door. Still frightened for his child, Paul Andrews reached to stop him. Terrifyingly, Jason responded to his father's action by saying, "They're waiting for me. I have to go." His voice was supposedly strange and emotionless, and as he spoke, the noises began again. His father was only able to stop him, a 4-year-old boy, from leaving the house by grasping him firmly and waiting for both the crashing sounds and his son's peculiar emotional state to fade away. Gradually, Jason was released from whatever trance-like state he seemed to have entered. This dramatic incident signalled the start of a new era for the Andrews family. No longer were the bizarre events which they had experienced, singular happenings soon overshadowed by the business of daily life, so easily dismissed. Something strange and terrifying was going on. Poltergeist-like activity began to plague their house, with electrical equipment turning on and off by itself, and everyday objects such as keys, cups, plates, and books appearing in places different from where they had been left. Arguably most peculiar, however, was how the cottage seemed to be in a time zone all of its own. According to Anne, clocks would gain or lose time, all misbehaving simultaneously, with there being no reason as to why this was happening. The Andrews even summoned an electrician to the house, not once but multiple times, to see if there was an issue with the wiring. There was not, and so they grew to live with the strangeness, determining that they were being haunted by a troubled spirit who they nicknamed Charlie. And yet, as time went by, there was something that the Andrews could not ignore. Far from being influenced by an unseen entity, a spirit from beyond the grave with restless hands, they were being watched by something very physical, something which followed them even after they left Sweetbriar Cottage. Some 8 years after Jason's dramatic 4th birthday, the Andrews were living elsewhere and tending to a farm which backed onto dense woodland leading to Ministry of Defence land. In her book, Anne recalls what should have been an ordinary Tuesday in 1995, which turned out to be one of the first times she and her family became aware of what she refers to as the Watchers. The boys were at school, and Anne and her husband Paul had just pulled up to the farm. As they did, they caught sight of something unexpected in the neighbouring wheat field. 2 men, tall, wearing dark overcoats and hats. They did not look like farmers, and as Paul went to care for the animals and conduct other chores around the farm, the 2 figures remained in the field, strangely immobile and silent, watching, with their faces turned towards the farm. Eventually, Paul decided to confront them. However, as he approached, the men turned, walked, and vanished into the adjacent woods. No amount of searching could reveal where they went, and most importantly, what they had wanted. Undoubtedly, this was a disturbing moment for the family, most especially as it inaugurated a new and unsettling routine for them. After all, the following Saturday, the strangers are said to have returned, once again watching, once again disappearing into thick woods. This would continue for years. And far from only watching, terrifyingly the Watchers are claimed to have left the woods and the wheat field and entered the farm itself. Several misfortunes relating to the family's livestock, including cows dying in inexplicable ways, were blamed on these mysterious figures, as was the telephone that the family heard ringing from the woods. Then there was the incident with the caravan. On the farm, the Andrews kept a caravan, which they used for storage. On one occasion, when walking into it, Anne and Paul are said to have instantly realised that someone had been in there. Paperwork had been moved around, and the contents of the cupboards had been rearranged. It was as though someone, after searching through the Andrews' belongings, had tried to conceal that they had been there. And yet Anne knew that things were not as they had been left. The Watchers had been there. It wasn't until May 1997 that Anne is said to have got her first good look at one of these sinister figures. Crossing the field which bordered the woods, she claims to have become aware of someone watching her from behind a tree. Writing about this encounter in her book, she describes the figure as having a face so pale that it was almost luminous, and a head that was too big to be human. Hairless, with odd movements akin to gliding, the stranger peered at her from around a tree trunk before merging with the woods. And so, what did these Watchers want? When interviewed in the early 2000s for a UK television show, Anne Andrews stated that it was her belief that she and her family were alien abductees. "We saw what we thought initially to be a star, a very bright star," Anne explained in her interview. "The star started getting bigger and bigger, and it looked as if it was coming straight for our window." She then described how her memory faltered, being unable to remember what happened next. Waking the next morning, her first thought was for her children. When she spoke with her son Jason and told him about the bright light that she and her husband had seen, he responded by telling her that he had been taken. Jason told her that the beings had showed him how governments on Earth are not merely aware of their existence, but seem to have secret programs whereby they experiment on extraterrestrials. Anne's son described in terrible detail how they were kept alive in glass tanks and bits of them being put in sealed containers, with other non-human entities being shot by human soldiers. And there was more. Continuing, Jason revealed that he had been taken to an enormous room with hundreds of other abductees. There, on a large cinema-like screen, he was shown an image of the Earth. At this point in his recollection, Anne, as she explains in her book, had to interrupt her son. She knew what came next. It suddenly blew up, she is said to have whispered to him. To that, Jason simply smiled and said, "I knew you were there. I saw you." This was not Jason's first abduction, and as Anne suddenly and painfully realized in that moment, neither was it hers. After this revelation, Anne began to reassess many of her other memories from childhood which she had suppressed and half forgotten. In particular, she returned to a night when she was in bed sleeping alongside her mother whilst her father was at work. According to her written testimony, she had been struggling to sleep and had the peculiar sensation that there was someone else in the room with her and her mother. Gripped by fear, she peeped out from under the covers and witnessed a cloaked figure rise up through the floor. This figure, so Anne claims, glided up to the height of a tall male and stood at the end of the bed. Anne states that it then moved towards her, after which it pushed back its hood so as to stare at her with large almond-shaped black eyes. After this, her memory ends. Over the years, Anne has come to accept many other memories such as this. By the time that she decided to speak publicly about all that she had experienced, both during a television interview and in her 1998 book, abduction was a regular part of her and her family's life. For Jason in particular, a boy who had suffered strange happenings from the moment he was born, Anne states that there was an unusual, if very genuine, sense of relief that came after a name was put to his experiences. Reading Anne's book, it is clear that from the very beginning, the well-being of her children was at the forefront of her mind. And so, while she may have shared in that relief also, she felt another emotion as well: deep concern. Her children, in particular her youngest, were for some reason attracting the continued attention of alien beings. And not merely that, they were becoming more and more under the influence of them. Discussing his own abduction experiences, Jason Andrews has quite readily suggested that he must be special, and that he must have been specially chosen by the beings for some purpose. On more than one occasion, he is said to have slipped into a trance-like state, and, as his mother words it, has become a mouthpiece for his kidnappers. Horrifically, one time this is reported as having manifest as an adolescent Jason declaring in flat monotone, "I am them, and they are me." In waking life, Jason is terrified of his experiences and the beings which inflict them upon him. Some of his earliest memories go back to the cradle, when his mother would find him moved about his bedroom. Sharing these recollections with a psychiatrist, he claimed that he could clearly see some long fingers reaching down into the cot so as to pick him up. They were much longer than those of his mother, and they were thin with large joints at the knuckles. Describing their colour, he said that they were dark, but not black or brown, not even grey. He had never seen a colour like it, with his best description being that the skin of his abductor's hands was a dark dolphin colour. Such chilling encounters stretched the length of his childhood, with Jason, corroborated by his mother, reporting the regular appearance of inexplicable red marks on his skin which would disappear by morning. These marks are said to have been the result of physical examinations which the beings forced Jason to undergo. This, when he could remember the details, would take place somewhere cold in a dark room. Each time this happened, he was terrified. One of the most remarkable elements of the Andrews family abductions is the hereditary nature of the happenings. After all, much of what Jason, and to a lesser extent his older brother Daniel, has described as having happened to him throughout his childhood can be paired with Anne's own girlhood experiences. The hooded figure, which she claimed to have witnessed rise up through the floor, matches the one which Jason frequently encountered. Describing his bad nights, Jason states that he would see something at the end of the bed, almost out of the corner of his eye. It rises up through the floor. This being he calls the Big One. There is only ever one Big One, he reveals in his mother's book. The head is large, with big black eyes on a slant which go around the side of the head, and a very small nose and mouth. It's thin, and it has the long dark fingers that I remember from my baby days. And so there is a terrifying consistency to their testimonies. Presumably these experiences continued after Anne released her book and later appeared on screen to share her story. And certainly, if what she claims is in fact true, there may not be an end to it anytime soon. After all, in her own childhood experiences, Anne recalls being taken, hand in hand, by one of these beings in the presence of her father. Given that he was entranced in this memory, one can assume that he too could have shared his own unearthly experiences, with abductions running in the family. Indeed, such is claimed by many who identify as alien abductees. Why this is the case is not known. Is there some sort of genetic predisposition to being malleable enough for extraterrestrial manipulation to take hold? Or is it a case of convenience, with the same people being in the same place for these beings to take? Either way, in the early days of the Andrews family coming to terms with their experiences, Paul Andrews struggled to accept what his wife, so he interpreted it at the time, had cursed his children with: abduction by the Watchers. In the epilogue of Anne's book, her son Jason's thoughts are clear. Alien abduction is not something he wants to live with. I'd just like it to stop. I want them to leave me alone. I want them to let me be ordinary. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. You can also sign up to my email newsletter over on paranormalscholar.com to get notifications of new uploads sent straight to your inbox. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not watch the one suggested on screen now? Until next time,